And now, the fabric of family.
Hi, I'm Barry Gilreath, the evangelist for the Highland Church of Christ in Dalton, Georgia, welcoming you today to another program of Fabric of the Family. This is a program that is designed to address important issues that are related to your family as well as mine. And so each time we come before you in this program, we want to deal with issues that are relevant to the family. And we certainly have a subject that we want to discuss today that is relevant to the family and certainly can have a great impact upon it, because we're going to be talking about the subject of lying. And to help me do this, I have two guests with me today. Chad Dollahite. Chad is with the Gospel Broadcasting Network. He works with the network on a part-time basis. He also is one of the evangelists at the Greens Lake Road Church of Christ in Chattanooga, Tennessee. Chad, we're very happy to have you with us.
Thank you.
And also Todd Creighton. Todd comes to us from the Ridgedale Church of Christ in Chattanooga, Tennessee. He has been on the program at other times as well. I believe you're also on the Q&A program that the Gospel Broadcasting Network produces. And so we're delighted to have both of you men here with us today. And as I announced just a moment ago to those listening and watching the program today, we're talking about lying. And certainly this is a subject that will have an effect upon our family if we participate in it. So I want to begin by asking Todd this question so we can kind of define our terms. What do we mean by lying?
Well, I think the definition that is generally accepted by most would be that to deliberately tell or write something that's false.
All right. So lying is something we engage in to where we're trying to deceive. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
All right. So someone then could maybe utter something that's not true, but would that necessarily mean that they're engaging in a lie?
And that's a good point. No, that wouldn't necessarily mean that they're engaging in a lie. It also could be an instance where someone makes a statement and then changes his mind. I'm thinking of the passage where Jesus said, at this time I will not go up to Jerusalem, and later he went. Now, reading that in the context, someone would say, okay, we caught Jesus. He told a falsehood because he said he wouldn't go, then he went. Okay. But in normal conversation, we do that. We may say, oh, well, I wasn't going to go there, but I changed my mind. I'm going to go. You weren't intentionally saying something to deceive. It was just a change of mind. So that's a good point.
And that's an excellent point that you brought up there with the example of Jesus. So what we then need to understand that to engage in a lie means that there is the intent to deceive on my part. Chad, what does the Bible have to say about the subject of lying?
Well, the Bible has a great deal to say about this. One of the passages that always first comes to my mind is Revelation 21, verse 8. But the fearful and unbelieving and the abominable and murderers and whoremongers and sorcerers and idolaters and all liars shall have their part in the lake which burneth with fire and brimstone, which is the second death.
Well, that certainly shows us how serious this subject we're talking about is. It will cause one to be lost in the lake of fire for all eternity. The Bible then encourages us not to engage in this type of activity. Any other passages come to mind?
Well, there are passages in the Bible that just, one thing that comes to my mind that sticks out about this subject is there are passages in the Bible that say we should not lie, but then there are also just numerous passages in the Bible that encourage us to honesty. Over in Romans 12, Paul says, provide things honest in the sight of all men. And so there are what we might call negative warnings against lying and falsehood and deceit, but then there are also positive warnings toward being honest.
Right, and one of the negative, to use your term, negative aspects of lying where the Bible tells us not to do it would be in Colossians chapter 3 and verse 9, where Paul says, lie ye not to one another. Mm-hmm. Well, that certainly has application to us as we go out into the world and we're on the job or we're at school, but it also has application to the family, does it not, Todd?
Well, absolutely it does. Our character and the way that we are to carry ourselves as Christians. I remember Philippians chapter 1 about
Open
walking
controls.
in a manner worthy of the gospel. The gospel is truth. It's all truth, the teaching of Christ. And to behave, when he talks about walk there, it's our lifestyle. When we do those things that aren't fitting of the gospel, fitting of a Christian, then we're not pleasing to God. And of course, lying would be included in that. And it's interesting too, of course, that God shows a contrast between truth and falsehood. And that everything that is against truth, in essence, it is a lie. It is something designed to deceive. It's designed to give a false conclusion. A good example in 2 Thessalonians, and I thought of this when Chad was making a good point. In 2 Thessalonians chapter 10, he says, "And with all deceivableness of unrighteousness in them that perish, because they receive not the love of the truth, that they might be saved. And for this cause God shall send them strong delusion, that they should believe a lie." And so that God will allow us to believe those things that we choose to, but it's up to us to investigate. And so that brings up a good point of us in our own personal character, that we have to police ourselves, as it were. One of the reasons that I think people continuing lying is because they've gotten away with it. And maybe they start off saying something that's false or a lie because of fear or because of selfishness or whatever the goal, and those lies continue to build and build and build, and it's like the more I get away with it, the easier it seems. And yet the Bible tells us we ought to police ourselves in the beginning. And so that when we know, if we even have the desire to tell something is false, something there ought to kick in and say, listen, I'm a Christian and I can't do that. I can't compromise my spirituality for whatever I might gain from telling this lie.
It's certainly true that lying can begin to expand if we engage in it. And that's a good point that you made there, and it reminded me of a story I heard about some boys, and they were constantly telling lies. And so this teacher was getting sick and tired of these boys telling her lies. They always had a story of why they couldn't get their homework done, or why they couldn't do this particular assignment. So on one particular occasion, these boys came in about 30 minutes late, and they missed a test that had been planned for that morning. And so the teacher said, where were you? They said, oh, we had a flat tire. Well, the teacher was suspicious. So she said, okay, I tell you what, boys, I'm going to allow you to take your test. But your test's going to be different than everyone else's. And you're only going to have one question. And she sent those boys to different parts of the room, in corners of the room. She said, put your face toward the wall and you get prepared to write the answer. And she said, all right, here's your question. Which tire was flat? Well, you see, they were caught in a lie. And that's what happens with lying, isn't it? We may get away with it on the front end. And this can become a way in which we can respond to situations that we're not comfortable with, but eventually, the Bible says, be sure what?
Your sin will find
Your
you out.
sin will find you out. That's true. Well, ultimately, who is, attributed to being the father of liars?
Satan.
John chapter 8 and verse 44, I believe. Jesus talked about how that you are of your father the devil, and how that he was a liar from the beginning. Now, what was Jesus referencing there when he said you were a liar from the beginning, Chad?
Well, back to the literal beginning of creation. Shortly after creation, we're not given an exact time frame, but it seems to be fairly shortly after the creation. Satan comes to Eve and he asks the question, has God said you can eat of every tree? And she says, well, we're not supposed to eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And God says, the day that we eat thereof, we shall surely die. And of course, Satan just changed one word, and he says, you shall not surely die.
And we probably heard a sermon along the line of the knot in the devil's tail.
Right.
Well, that's right. He told a tall tale on that day, didn't he? And so he is attributed as being the father of liars. What a reputation to have. And, you know, it's sad, but he has many offspring who share that same characteristic with their father. And that's what Jesus was saying. You're of your father, the devil, who was a liar from the very beginning. Well, let's think about for just a moment why people lie. Why do they engage in lying, Todd? Can you give us a reason?
As we were talking about this passage in John 8, verse 44, it just clicked in my mind with the written account of Ananias and Sapphira. And what's always fascinating to me about that account is when Ananias and Sapphira sold the property and they still had the money in their possession, they had a choice that they could have made. They could have given and still been pleasing to God, but they at some point decided, let's say this is everything.
And so what was the
deceive.
purpose of their lying?
Well, it was selfishness, and I guess probably maybe in a greater sense, pride.
Yeah.
They wanted the accolade of saying, oh, they're so sacrificial that they've given everything. And I don't know if the amount was large or small, but something that they knew they would be noticed because they've given this large amount.
Alert.
Yeah, you know,
Allow this device
sometimes
to access
people will lie
photos and
because
videos.
they want something that perhaps they wouldn't
device
have if
allow.
they didn't lie. You know, years ago,
Selected.
there were two artists, musicians, Milli Vanilli. You remember that? Mm-hmm. What was their problem, Chad?
They couldn't sing.
They couldn't sing, could they? But yet, did they not win a Grammy?
And come to find out, it wasn't them doing the singing.
It wasn't them doing the singing. I think they even had to give the Grammy back.
Yeah.
But there's an example where somebody, you know, apparently wanted something so badly that they were willing to lie in the process in order to get it. And certainly that's a wonderful Bible example that you've shared with us there, Todd, about here's someone who wanted something. Maybe it was the accolade of being these generous givers. And they lied in the process. They said, we've given it all, when in reality, they had not given it all. So that's a good point. What's another?
Well, definitely one I think that is really chief as pertains to the family is as adults, and of course teaching your children about lying and helping them to understand these reasons behind it. I think you can think of 4 reasons or 4 categories, and we've talked about one, selfishness being a category of why people lie, but also fear. Could be fear of punishment, a child who's afraid that they're going to get in trouble for something they did and they lie to try to get out of it. And, you know, my wife and I, having 2 boys, 7 and 4, and trying to help them to understand why lying is wrong. It's been a process.
Yeah.
Because, you know,
Allow this device
sometimes
to access
they will-
photos and videos.
when they were even younger, say around, say 3 years old or so.
Don't allow.
They
Allow.
say things, and you think in your mind,
Selected.
okay, are they
Screen recording.
Are they really saying this because they know they're going to deceive, or is it a concept they don't understand? And so as a parent, you start to train and help them. And when you get to such point with a child that you know they've said this because they're trying to get out of it, and then you try to handle it appropriately. So I think with fear, that particular thing of lying is helping a child or even sometimes adults to know that whatever the circumstances or whatever it is they've done, it's going to be better if they tell the truth. And of course, I emphasize that with my boys. It may not get you out of the consequences, but it's always going to be better if you're honest about it, because that's something you never want to lose with someone, is their ability to trust you. And so I think fear is a big factor. Also, something that goes hand in hand with that is guilt and shame. You know, we feel guilty about something we've done, and it's not necessarily we're afraid of the consequences, but afraid of the way we'll look. You know, I think that keeps a lot of people who are Christians from coming forward when they've sinned publicly, is that guilt over, how did I let myself get in this situation? And another thing that's probably a sister to that is shame, that, you know, I feel like I'm no longer worthy to tell the truth. If I do tell the truth, I'm just going to go back and do the same thing. So I might as well, just not even deal with it. And in a sense, they're lying by default. They haven't told a lie, but they haven't told the truth either.
Yeah.
So I think those 4 things that stick out in my mind as some of the reasons why people lie and try to use lies as a escape from those things.
Chad, what are your thoughts? Any ideas, thoughts concerning why people lie? What are some reasons for that? Anything Todd said you want to touch on?
I think, and this is a separate reason from what Todd mentioned, but I think it's one of the sadder reasons why people lie, but it's one of the big reasons as well. Some people lie to make themselves look better, and it's an idea of building up self, trying to make themselves look better, even if that means to the detriment of others, running down good names in situations like that. But I think that's a big reason why people lie. They want to make themselves look better.
Right.
And so they go about any means to do it, even if that means, that's what the Jews were doing in Jesus' day back in John 8:44. They lied about him to try to make themselves look better. And in fact, they boldly, proudly proclaimed, we have Abraham as our father.
Right.
Jesus says, Abraham's not your father. Your father is the father of lies.
Yeah.
Satan.
And I think it's so important, since this is a program about the family, that we especially emphasize, we've talked about some of the reasons people lie, but the importance for parents in the home to begin to teach their children from the time that they're able to understand that lying is not an acceptable means of communication.
Right.
And, something you touched on there, you were talking about your own boys and, trying to determine whether they understood a concept or whether they were lying. When I was growing up, I always understood, and I was told by my parents, now if you do something wrong, there's going to be punishment. But if you lie about it in the process, well, there's going to be extra punishment.
Right.
And, I think we need to think about that very seriously, because if our children do not learn the importance of telling the truth in the home, well, we know what the consequences of that are going to be. They're not going to tell the truth at school. They're not going to tell the truth when they get older and they start working and they find themselves in a situation that they don't want to deal with. Well, I'll tell a lie. And so it's like a snowball, And sometimes parents may unintentionally teach their children that it's okay to lie, not by words per se, but by the fact that they did not respond to maybe things that were smaller, things that seemed more innocent. But yet the child at a very young age learns, hey, there's no consequences to lying. Or, I can lie and I can get away with it. And this thing just continues to grow and to grow and to grow until one day they're engaging in lies that will have serious consequence not only upon their soul, but upon their life here. And, we've just got about a minute or two left. And so I think it would be good maybe just to think about, how serious is this subject? Well, you brought up a passage, the very beginning of our study, Chad, over in Revelation. And basically, what does that passage tell us about the seriousness of lying?
It's going to cost those who engage in it their souls eternally in the lake which burns with fire and brimstone.
Now, what kind of liars? Those who tell little white lies, those who tell big lies. Sometimes we want to distinguish between lies. Now, what does that verse say again, Chad?
It says all liars.
All liars. All liars. And so as far as God is concerned, there are not some lies that, well, that's not too bad, that's acceptable. And some lies, well, that's pretty serious. All lies. Todd?
Something you pointed out I thought was real good, and this also goes along with the excellent verse that Chad brought up, is that if we don't live it in front of our children, in front of our spouses, then it's just a waste of time to tell them not to do it. If they hear you making a commitment and then you say, oh, I have something else coming up, and they know you didn't, they will remember.
Exactly right. A great way to conclude this program today. Well, I want to thank you, brethren, for being with us, and we want to thank you for being a part of this program today as we've been talking about a very important subject that is certainly one that affects the family. Until next time, I'm Barry Gilreath for Fabric of the Family, wishing you a great day.
Let's make the most of a minute. Someone wrote a short list of 10 things you will never regret. Here they are. Showing kindness to an aged person. Destroying a letter written in anger.
Trust
Offering
passcode
an
field.
apology that will
06
save a
values entered.
friendship.
Secure. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 7, 6, 6, 5, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 2, 1, 1, 2, 2, 3, 3. Hearing devices. Apple TV remote. Button. Hearing Apple TV camera. Flash. Calculate timer. But selected. Screen recording.